Trump, WEF 2026, Sovereignty, Global Governance, and the Reordering of Power. President Donald Trump's intervention at the World Economic Forum in Davos must be understood not as an isolated political event, but as part of a longer geopolitical and economic transformation underway since the end of the Cold War. At its core lies a structural conflict between two models of power: nation-state sovereignty on one side, and transnational, technocratic governance on the other. The post-Cold War order and the rise of global governance. Following the collapse of the Soviet Union, the United States and its European allies promoted a liberal international order built on free trade, capital mobility, supranational institutions, and regulatory harmonization. Institutions such as the World Trade Organization, the European Union, the IMF, and the World Economic Forum became central platforms for economic coordination. This system assumed that globalization would produce convergence, prosperity, and political stability. For a time, this model appeared successful. Financial markets expanded, global supply chains deepened, and consumption increased. However, political economy analysis shows that gains were unevenly distributed. Deindustrialization in the United States and parts of Europe hollowed out manufacturing regions, while financialization concentrated wealth among corporate and financial elites. Real wages stagnated for large segments of the population, even as asset prices soared. Europe's structural constraints. The European Union represents the most advanced experiment in supranational governance. The introduction of the euro removed monetary sovereignty from member states while imposing fiscal discipline through deficit and debt rules. This architecture limited national policy flexibility, particularly during crises such as the 2008 financial collapse and the Eurozone debt crisis. Southern European countries experienced prolonged austerity, high unemployment, and declining public investment. Meanwhile, decision-making increasingly shifted toward unelected institutions in Brussels, Frankfurt, and Luxembourg. This technocratic structure weakened democratic accountability and fueled public disillusionment, giving rise to populist movements across the continent. Migration, labor, and distributional effects. Migration policy further intensified these tensions. Since the early 2010s, Europe has experienced large-scale migration flows driven by conflicts in the Middle East, Africa, and economic disparities. From a political economy perspective, migration produces asymmetric outcomes. Employers benefit from an expanded labor supply and wage competition, while the costs of integration, housing, welfare, policing, and education are borne largely by taxpayers and local communities. Germany and Sweden, often cited as models of openness, have faced growing public debates over crime, social cohesion, and state capacity. These debates are not solely cultural. They are economic and institutional, reflecting stress on welfare systems designed for smaller, more cohesive populations. Trump and the challenge to the neoliberal consensus. Trump's rise must be situated within this broader crisis of globalization. His rhetoric and policies, trade protection, pressure on NATO allies, resistance to multilateral agreements, and emphasis on borders, represent a rejection of the post-1990 neoliberal consensus. Unlike previous U.S. administrations that managed globalization through diplomacy and institutional alignment, Trump openly challenged its assumptions. From a geopolitical standpoint, this stance disrupted transatlantic relations. The EU's hostility toward Trump reflected not only disagreement over tone, but fear of a breakdown in the ideological foundations of global governance. A United States prioritizing national interest over system maintenance threatens institutions whose legitimacy depends on elite consensus rather than popular mandate. Power, elites, and policy capture. Political economy theory emphasizes elite capture as a recurring feature of mature capitalist systems. Financial institutions, large corporations, and transnational philanthropic networks exert influence through lobbying, funding, and agenda setting. While framed as humanitarian or progressive, many policies ultimately socialize costs while privatizing gains. Taxpayers finance outcomes over which they have limited democratic control. This dynamic explains rising public skepticism toward institutions such as the EU, the WEF, and national governments perceived as aligned with global capital rather than domestic constituencies. The legitimacy crisis is not ideological alone. It is rooted in material outcomes, the present and the emerging multipolar order. Today, the global system is shifting toward multipolarity. China, Russia, and regional powers increasingly challenge Western-led institutions. Trade fragmentation, sanctions, reshoring, and energy security have replaced the optimism of the 1990s. Trump's approach, often dismissed as disruptive, can also be interpreted as an early recognition of this transition. In this context, Trump functions as a counter-hegemonic actor within the Western system itself. The resistance he faces from political, financial, and institutional elites reflects a deeper struggle over who governs economic outcomes, transnational networks, or sovereign states accountable to their populations. Conclusion: the conflict surrounding Trump is not primarily about personality or rhetoric. It is about power, distribution, and governance in an era where globalization has reached its political limits. Europe's challenges, America's polarization, and the erosion of trust in institutions all point to the same conclusion. The post-Cold War model of elite-driven globalization is under strain. What replaces it, reformed multilateralism or renewed sovereignty, remains the central geopolitical and economic question of our time.